every album I've ever made, every time I've ever gone to the studio, I've always thought, that's I can do better than that. But this one, the sound of it, the final produced sound, it's the first time so I'm completely happy. I think we'd have to go a long way to get an album to sound better than this without getting signed to Atlantic Records or something.
That's an interesting point, because for where we got to with the provisional mixes and the provisional bits of mastering that we tried here, then when we got in contact with the guy at Abbey Road, I think the difference that's made to what was already a great sounding album was just phenomenal. It really takes it to that. It's a silly thing to say, but it really sounds like a real CD now. It doesn't sound like something we've spent a few months recording in our houses. It sounds like, wow, that's something that's been done properly. And for anybody that's ever tried recording, as Ian said, you try and improve what you've done on what you've done before. But this really is just miles ahead of certainly anything I've done. And it's rocking.
It's set out well, and it's a lot of the things, or people said about Dogs of War was the fact that it was a little bit too long, which is a bit unfair because you got the value for money thing, and when albums were albums, pre-digital age, you put it on, and 40 minutes was about where the attention span was.
I think you're right, because I find it with a lot of remaster reissue CDs. Some extra stuff you get on it is really cool, and live stuff. I've got a few where you do think, Christ alive, when's this going to finish? Because you lose the will to live. And I think again the whole thing with the internet and Spotify, and people are used to just picking and choosing and stuff. It's that instant gratification thing. I think it is a 40, 45 minutes, 50 minutes at a push. I think as soon as you start getting over that, you've got to be really into it to want to sit there. Who has time, unless I'm in the car? Nowadays is probably the longest stretch I get to listen to any album, really. I just don't. You never seem to have the time to, like you used to. You get yourself comfy and you get your cup of tea and you get the album out and you open up the gatefold and you put it on, and the ritualistic sort of side of it just doesn't, isn't there anymore. So
that's when you'll hear me sing the Bullet Bell Blues.
The internet played a big part in the band getting back together again. Around about 2002-2003, I googled Soldier just to see what would come up, and was quite surprised by the response. So I got back in touch with Ian and said, there's a lot of interest in the band still. Would he be interested in putting the band back together, or just having a couple of rehearsals to see if we could still play as a unit? And he was up for it. And again, using the internet, we managed to track down Gary to somewhere up in Blackburn. Dragged him down for a weekend, got Ian in, the old drummer, and we did a couple of rehearsals, and were quite surprised by the dynamic that the band still had. And we took it into a bit more of a project and decided just to record a few songs for a small EP, just really to have a bit of closure on the band. So in 2003 we recorded the Infantricide EP, and thought that would be it, but we decided to continue and decided to try and do a few gigs. Ian wasn't really up for it. Ian had to drop the drummer, so we got in young Alex, who was I think 17, 18 at the time, who again brought a lot more dynamic and vibrancy to the band. And we carried on then for a few years, doing a lot of rehearsals, doing very few gigs for various reasons, more to do with logistics I suppose, with Gary living up north. And then around about 2006, 3 years, we decided again, because Gary wasn't too well at the time, to knock it on the head, and we drew a line again in 2006. And then in 2007 we thought the band was sounding too good to call it quits, so we put out some feelers for singers, and Richard sent me a demo tape, and I loved it, what he was singing, and one of the songs in particular, which I'm still trying to get the band to play, which they won't, which they should. And really that's how we got to where we are now. We've obviously changed drummers a couple of times since then, Had a couple of different bass players. I've had a few commitments, which meant I couldn't play in the band full time. In the last couple of years, we've produced a couple of great albums, and the one that is due to come out in summer this year is, in my opinion, probably the best work the band's ever done, and it's an absolute stormer.
The impact of the internet on bands and recording. I think, the internet, I think, is a fantastic thing for smaller bands and a terrible thing for bigger bands, because obviously bigger bands with very large recording contracts and stuff like that will, have the opportunity to sell a huge amount of records and make a lot of money. And if you're bumping on the bottom, then it's a bit more of a struggle. But now, most bands with a bit of effort can get their music out to people and really bypass a record company. So the internet, I think, is like I say, good for smaller bands, bad for bigger bands.
Sort of millennium year was, in my mind, although I'm not a very technologically minded person, but in my mind, millennium year was the watershed of when all that took place and really came to the forefront. And everyone had access to the internet, so for 15 years it's blown all the doors open. All the music prejudice of type of music have all gone completely out the window thanks to the internet, and it's made it a lot more accessible to everybody, and certainly in Soldier's case, it's made certain that we can have an active career and be a going concern once again. So without the internet, there'd be no international recognition, and no one would be aware of what we were about, what we were doing.
Favourite players, my dark secret is I used to be a drummer, so I've sort of got drumming favourites and singing favourites. Being a massive Purple fan, Ian Pace, all the way. The greatest groove hard rock drummer ever, in my opinion. Vocalist wise, it's everybody from Gillan, Coverdale, Glenn Hughes. John Waite is, for phrasing and tone, John Waite and Phil Mogg. Very, very identifiable singers. Great style, very individual.
I suppose it has to be Neil Peart. I was 6 years in a Rush tribute band, so I had that stuff drummed into me. So Neil Peart, learning all his parts, that has a lot of respect for him. Mike Portnoy and Dave Grohl, just because they're good band drummers. They're not showing off. They'll sit in a band and just play what's right for the music. And Mike Portnoy, I met him a couple of times, and I asked him if he was going to do a drum solo. This was at Wolverhampton, and he said he'd rather the band play another song than he'd do a drum solo. So that was very unselfish of him.
I should say my favourite guitar players, not necessarily influence ones, but favourite players would be Angus Young, Malcolm Young, Dave Murray and Adrian Smith, Rick Nielsen of Cheap Trick, who remains unsung a lot, but his guitar delivery is very unique and appeals greatly to me. And the Holy Trinity of Blackmore, Page and Iommi.
Okay, my favourite players. Loads and loads of people. Probably, I would say, 70s, 80s guitarists mostly, because they were all so different. Robin Trower, Pat Travers, Jeff Beck, Richie Blackmore, just loads and loads. I haven't got a particular favourite, and I like some of the new guitarists like Joe Satriani.
Favourite bass players have to be obviously Lemmy. I always like the Made in Japan sound or tone of Roger Glover. Geezer Butler for his style and for his technical wizardry. That'd have to be Geddy Lee. They're my favourite four bass players.
Will you stand them down and never look away?